In this video, we'll look at the Azure Storage services. Uh, we'll try to understand what kind of features or services provided by Azure as part of the storage. That we'll understand what is the storage account and how it is being structured and what services are being provided as part of the storage account, or we can call it as a features. Then what type of storage accounts are available. Then how we can replicate the storage account across the multiple regions or within the region, and what options we have available, and look at that how Azure is going to calculate the cost of a storage account. Okay. So before we go into this, in the on-premises data centers, we might have heard about something called as an SAN storage, NAS storage, file servers. So mostly we would see an a SAN storage attached to a servers where to create virtual machines or a database applications where they reside on the SAN storage, a centralized storage where the servers could be a VMware vSphere ESXi servers, or could be a hypervisor servers, or could be a Windows or Linux operating systems where they store the data on these centralized storage devices. Similarly, there is an option called as a NAS, which we use called NAS. We might have heard about something called as a NetApp pilots, which is the leading provider of a NAS storage systems, a centralized, I would say, file shares. Okay, so we have a Windows file shares. So we put one Windows server, add a lot of storage or disks into the Windows server, then we create folders, then we share the folder, so which can be accessible from multiple users. But for servers like applications like e-commerce applications, okay, we see Amazon or in Flipkart or something. So a lot of images are being uploaded, a lot of videos are being uploaded. Now a lot of storage is required for these kind of an applications to store these images and these kind of video content. So now having a local hard disk or the server, that capacity may not be sufficient. That is where we use these kind of devices called as a NAS storage devices. So which also act like a file shares. Um, so now in Azure, so what services and how are we going to get kind of storages and what are things? And mostly we are all using a G Drive, a Google Drive, or a OneDrive. Most of the organizations which are using a O365 by default, they get a OneDrive if they have a license assigned. And similarly, we see that a Google Drive, a 15 GB capacity of a Google Drive has been provided by Google for all the users. Now, what advantage we are seeing from a Google Drive? We store files and accessible from anywhere. Accessible from anywhere. So when I mean may anywhere means, so I don't need to carry my USB. I don't need to carry my floppy or something. I don't need to carry my CD. As we see, initially we used to copy our data into a CDs and keep it safe. Then later we used to copy our files into a USB drive, and wherever we want it, we used to carry it, because at once we have this Google Drive came into picture, or Dropbox came into picture. We said that, okay, let me put files into Google Drive, which can be accessible from anywhere as long as there is an internet access and log into my Gmail account. So that is where we call it as a storage. So, so you are storing all your photos, personal data, photos, your documents, or your learnings, or your content into a Google Drive, and wherever you go, so your data is available on the internet and you do it. But now in Azure, So we have different things. So we have Azure virtual machines which are getting created, and a lot of applications gets deployed into an Azure virtual machines or Azure app services. Then all these kind of things needs a date, I would say a storage where they can store the files or called as an images could be and videos or these things which can be accessible from anywhere. One thing. Second thing could be we might need a lot of storage to store backups or I would say data to be available, and we want to exchange data between the organizations, or so we use something called as an FTPs or SFTPs. So where we uh, upload files, then we share with customers. We'll share them an FTP details or SFTP details. Say that, okay, can you please download the files from this particular an FTP server? Like a lot of things which we would need it. Okay. And similarly on Azure, we would need some kind of a file shares. How, let's say you have 300 plus virtual machines. Then when users are logging into a virtual desktops, and Azure, then how are we going to manage your profiles? So you might need a shared, or I would say called as a file share where we can keep a roaming profiles or so user profiles, or you want to have some kind of a software repository in Azure, okay, which can be accessible across the virtual machines. Like there are so much of requirements, so many requirements coming up. Okay, so what is Azure is providing called as part of Azure Storage Services? Okay, so Azure provides a storage services where we can a centralized, I would say, called as a, a centralized storage location, a storage location on the Azure. So it sorts the information or the data we can collect as, and it could be files, it could be images. We'll talk about later. I just want to give it in high level. Files, images could be videos, could be some kind of etc. etc. And accessible from anywhere. Well, from anywhere. That means that the storage services provides a storage location where we can store the data and can be accessible from anywhere. That is, as long as there is a connectivity and internet access. So we can access them files. Then we would see that it is basically secure the access of the storage of the files, or it provides kind of a secure. Now, yes, the big concern could be from a security. Okay, hey, if I'm putting files into Google Drive, it is accessible from everywhere. But what happens to my organization data? I cannot put my organization data publicly on the internet. So I need to secure that. Okay. So Azure will provides various mechanisms where we can secure the storage, that from where it has to be accessible, from where it cannot be accessible, which users can access it, who can access it, or like, so we have so much of security around that, and it provides a security. Uh, then it provides called as in various types of services. Okay, like what we called as an we will call it as a blob storage. Then we called as a table storage. I'll explain them. Uh, we'll talk as part of this series of storage videos. I'll talk about one by one. Then we'll see called as in file shares. Then we call something called as in queues. Then SFTP services, like etc. So it provides various kind of storage services where people can use in different situations. So that's the biggest advantage of this one, where we can, and it can make the data available across the regions based on the configurations. So what happens if Azure South India region goes down for some reasons? then you want the data to be available on the other regions in case of non-availability of a specific geographical Azure region. So that also provides a lot of features across the data available across the regions. Based on it, provides called as replications where we would see that. Okay, so the one of the key service as part of the infrastructure in Azure is Azure Storage. So how it is going to provide is it? So in order to use the storage services, we need an Azure storage account. Azure storage account. So in order to consume the or in order to avail the an Azure storage services like whatever we're calling it as an, we need storage account. So let's take some examples like you might have different departments, different applications. Yes, there is an SAP application, there is an ERP application, there is an HRMS application, there is an and sales application. Like there are so many applications, so many departments are involved in an organization. Now, biggest concern comes that okay, how are we going to separate or isolate the data? First question, maybe. Second question, how are we going to ensure that only the required people or the required applications will access the data? How do we segregate the information of various these things? Like so many requirements comes up. Now, Azure provides a concept called as a storage account. I would say a storage account is like if you ask me that a server with a name on the Azure. So it is a container, I would say called as, it is basically a server with a name on the Azure, which allows us to store, to, which allows to store what we call as a blobs in an Azure terminology. So I would say called as a files. Okay. Let's not make it too complicated with the technical terminology called as a blobs. And a simple terminology we use called as a files, like an image file or a text file or a log file, or could be a video file, anything which we call it as a terminology called as a blob in an Azure terminology. And this allows us to store blobs, what we call as and provides like in table storage, various table storages, and which is a security boundary, which is a secondary boundary. So what is your security boundary? One storage account can hold unlimited data. It has an unlimited capacity. I would say it could be a larger capacity when I mean by unlimited bits, and it will be charged on based on various conditions or various usages. But one storage account, we can have a different access policies, and another storage account, we can have a different policies. Like, let's say there is an SAP application where SAP application is going to store the data, and there is an HRMS application. So we can segregate the application's data based on storage accounts. So I can have one storage account for an HRMS application. I can have a separate account for an sales application. I can have a separate account for infra team. I can have a separate account for some kind of like a based on the departments. I would say a finance department can have their own a storage account which they can store all this data, and we can have a different kind of an access and policies. Okay, so I might have a kind of a requirement of a backup to be taken, but I want just a cheaper storage cost or cheaper storage. Why do I want to pay more when I'm not going to use it on a regular basis, but I just need a storage capacity where to dump the data? So like that. So it is one of the primary thing is a security boundary. Second is an administrative boundary. Administrative boundary. So we can set a permissions that who can access this entire storage account, who can manage this. Maybe a department head or someone from a project manager want to manage the permissions and he want to control his own storage account, he can control it and he can provide permissions and he can do that. and which is from accessible from anywhere. The storage account has accessible from anywhere. It has basically a unique name across the globe. So it creates a name, a storage account, I would say like an called as a Venkat, whatever the name I give, like an dot blob dot core dot windows dot net, windows dot net. So during the creation of a storage account, it prompts you for a name. We'll talk about the naming standards, but so it gives a unique name. So the two users or two organizations or whatever that on the internet cannot have the same name. If I'm already created Venkat ASA, then other organization users cannot use the same name. So the uniqueness it provides that, and it provides basically access over an HTTP bar, HTTPS based on requirement. Okay. Now we see in on premises or in the server slash and file server IP address or a slash file server FKDN name, and we access it, which works based on SMB protocol. But this is purely works, the blob storage works on HTTP and HTTPS and these things. Okay. And which provides various replication options, replication of data across the regions. So a replication boundary, we can call it as a storage account, is a replication boundary. So which provides, what does that mean? That, okay, I have a production applications. So I want to ensure that the data is available or stored across multiple geographical regions. For some reasons, if one geographical region goes down, my data is safe. That is could be a production data, a very critical data. So I can have a different replication policy for this storage account. I might have a different storage account and which is more of a development environment, which they are using it or some kind of a testing purpose. So data is not very crucial for me. Then I would say that, okay, I don't need to replicate across the regions because there is a cost associated with it. So we can use it a local storage or whatever called as a local replication. Like, so the storage account has a called as in the replications. Okay, we can enable that. So that is where a storage account. So it's more of a server on the Azure in the backend. So we don't see that server. It provides a name to that server and which allows you to store files, and it is a security boundary, administrative boundary, and the files which are stored in this particular storage account or the services which you're going to use, it can be accessible from anywhere. It provides a unique name in the Azure and as well as unique then, and which can be accessible over the HTTP or HTTPS, but recommended is an HTTPS, and which provides a feature to replicate across the regions. Now, in order to have that, so the Azure provides an storage account. Under the storage account, it has been classified into a different four things. So when we call it as a blob storage. So under the storage account, it has been organized into different, I would say, services types or different services or features. A blob storage. Okay. So blob storage is basically a files storage. I would say a file is a blob. Just me put it, a blob is just a file. So that can be an image, that can be a video file, that can be a text file, or it can be any like an application files, which are could be, etc., etc. Okay, so we call them as a blob. Now, Azure provides this what we call as a blob storage, where can be used under a storage account. Okay, to store files and which are accessible from over the HTTP. Yes, and every file has a URL. File as a URL. So it provides a unique URL for each and every file which you upload into a blob storage. That is the beautiness of this service called as a blob storage service. Okay. So when we go to the some kind of an applications, okay, let's say if I'm going to an Amazon, www.amazon.in or something. So when we go to this images, and when you see called as an inspect an image, so these images you'd see called as an URL. So as we would see here, media-amazon.com images / image. Like these things, for each and every file which we upload into a blob storage, it provides an URL. So it means that every file has a URL. So we can, if I want to share a file, I can just copy that URL and share with someone else, or the applications can use that URL to read the data and these things. So which we call it as an unstructured data. So unstructured data. So there's no structure in the file. So it is just a simple structured data, which can be used for storing log files. Like this can be used to store your log files or application files or anything which can be used it. So which we call it as a blob storage. So in the next video, we'll talk very detailed about blob storage, but in this video, I'm just trying to give you and the overview about a storage account. And it provides a feature called as a file shares. File shares. We are familiar with accessing a file shares, we say called as in / some server name. Okay. Then we see that there are list of shared folders available. We get that. So from a lot of organizations will have a file shares, which is a centralized file, because this was the initial level of a centralized data store where applications or users or can store their data centrally and which can be accessible across the organizations or within that specific premises or locations. Similarly, in Azure, it provides called as in file shares. So now Azure provides a file shares, so which can be mapped to virtual machines. So we don't need any server or anything. So Azure Storage Services provides a file shares. So we can just create a file share, which is a name, and I would say called as a name associated for every with a file share, and which can be mapped to an Azure virtual machines or can be mapped to accessible from Azure network or okay, I would say called as in basically specific networks. So you can control it from where this file share can be accessible and can be used it. So this can be used like a repository is how we use it in on-premises, which can be used. So this is another kind of a service which is provided under the storage account, which is called as a file shares. Now, third thing which we is called as a table storage. Table storage. So what is this table storage? So I go to the in forms and websites where they collect like a contact us form. Let's say if I'm going to some registrations or some kind of an forms or will take some just mm, let me take. So I go to the contact us page. Okay. Sometimes we see that there will be an what we call it as a form which asks you for information. Okay, where we want to store like an information like a first name, a last name, a mobile number, an email ID, right? A description. Let's say there's a form, a contact us form in the applications or websites. So I don't need to have a database like in SQL Server or MySQL just to store this particular information. Because normally in applications, in order to store this information, we need a MySQL database or an MS SQL database or a Oracle database. But what happens, Azure is providing called as a table storage. So it's a simple a kind of an Excel file, I would say, an Excel file, kind of a simple Excel format file. So where it can store the data. So where the applications can interact with the table storage and can store the data, retrieve the data from the table storage. So which is accessible again. This is accessible from anywhere. From anywhere. This is accessible from anywhere. So you can start access from the internet or from applications, or you can have your own restrictions and anything. So which is typically people use a terminology called as a structured data. Structured data. So this is another kind of a service where if there is some application I just simply want to store just a few fields of information, then we can use the table storage, which can do that. Another kind of storage which is called as I would say, a queue storage. Queue storage. Developers are much aware of a queues. What does it mean by it? But we being the system administrators, we never come across with this kind of a concept, but I'll just explain it in at high level. So what happens here now? So this is an application one, an application two, and application three. So I would say an app one, an app two, an application three. Now, these three applications want to exchange communication, exchange information. Now, this application two depends on some information from app one, and application three will depends on some information from application one. Today, what happened? Micro services came into picture, so the applications have been divided into smaller portions. The one large application got divided into smaller portions, so which we called as a microservices. Each and every component has become an independent service. Now, how do they communicate with each other? How do they exchange information? Now, a simple that this application is responsible for storing some kind of, I would say, called as an employee's information. So whenever a new employee is being added into this application, now this application information has to go into payroll application. That, hey, there is a new employee assigned. You please start updating it. Now the app two, which is a payroll application, needs to get the details from an app one. It has to communicate to the app two that, hey, I created a new employee and here are the details. So now that is where we call as an accuse comes into picture. It is an queue messaging service, what we call as an, okay. So where these applications will keep interacting with the queues to get the information or to read the information or to share the information across these. It's a centralized storage to store the messages, I would say called as an application messages, exchanging of information. Okay. Application one, HRM says that, hey, I created a new user in my system and the user details are this one. Now, what this application can do is that now it keeps listening, or I would say keep monitoring these queues, saying that, hey, do I have a new message available? If there is a new message available, then it can take its own action, like it can create a user account in its own application, or it can initiate an email that, hey, user, you have been added into the system. Now you have to fill up all these details in order to enable your payroll, like so many things. So it provides the queue storage system, which can be, okay, use that. And we have other things which provide it called as an, sorry, SFTP. So it provides an SFTP service. So this can be enabled on a blob storage. Now we don't need an FTP server like FileZilla server or anything else to share the files across the customers or across the users. So this SFTP service enables us to share the files over the internet via SFTP protocol. So we can create user accounts and we can basically secure the data. We can have restrictions and everything which can be done on that. So these are the different kind of services are being provided by Azure as part of the Azure storage services. Storage services. So one is an what we called as a blob storage, one we called as a file sheets, one we call table storage, one we called as a queue storage. So SFTP service. So as when we create a storage account, so under that storage account, you can have all these things. So a storage account is specific to the region, and a storage account is specific to the region. So you have this region called as in Central India. So under this a storage account, so this is your whatever we called as a Venkat storage account or something, then blob.core.windows.net. So under this particular one, so you have we called as a blob storage, which we use another terminology called as containers. We'll talk detail about these things later in a couple other sessions. You have file shares, and we have what we call as a table storage. Under this, we have called as a queue storage. The storage account provides, so we can, in under one storage account, you can have a blob storage. You can have, sorry, you can have a file sheets under one storage account. You can have a table storage under one storage account. You can have a queue storage, queue a storage. So you can have mix of things. So it can be like a department called as an R&D department. We can create one storage account. Under that, we can have a blob storage. We can create a file sheets which are related to the production R&D department, or if there is required some kind of an queue storages or anything, whatever, we can create it. The storage account, it can have 3 to a maximum of 24 characters. and name, the storage account name. So it can be of up to 3 to 24 characters. And this can have only lowercase. So you cannot have an uppercase. Okay. So it is only a lowercase letters, I would say. And it must be unique across the globe. So you cannot have a storage account, two storage accounts with the same name. Okay. And it can consist of the a mix of numbers and letters, but as I said, its letters can be only a lowercase. This. So when you're creating a storage account, you have to keep in mind that it should be unique and it should have these things. So we have storage account types. So what does these types mean? Basically, purpose. Okay. It comes with like an options called as in various options, like in what we call as a general purpose, or an I would say called as a general purpose V2, okay, or a premium. Now, what happens with this types? So when you're creating a storage account, it asks you that you want to have a general purpose V2 or a premium. The performance of the storage depends on these general purpose or a premium. It means that at what speed it can read the data from the backend storage, at what speed it can write the data into the backend storage. So the general purpose and premium are basically the throughput capacities and the performance where it provides for the read write of the files which are stored into the storage account. Okay. So again, the cost varies based on various factors, but if you're going to use a premium storage account, okay, as it provides you an higher throughput capacity and a better latency, okay, when you are reading. So what happens here now? Let's say you take an applications like in Amazon, where thousands of users are being active on the system. People are accessing the images, videos. So now they need a very good high latency, I would say called as a better latency and throughput to read and write the files. That's where people can use called as a premium services, but however, there is a cost associated with it. Now, when we are creating a storage account, the cost is varied based on various factors. One is a region, as the storage account is a region specific, is a region specific. So there is storage cost may vary based on a region to region and account type. Are you using a general purpose or are you using a premium and a capacity? So is it in 1 MB or 200 MB or a 600 MB or a 1 GB or a 2 GB or at 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte? What is that capacity you are using it at that moment? So as you keep adding the files, the cost will get vary based on the capacity. And you have like an access tiers, I would say called as we have, as we go on, we'll talk more about hot or cold or called as an archive. Okay. So archive could be like in very low cost disks where Azure is going to store the uh, data in the low cost disks like a backups. So we don't restore backups on a daily basis. We don't read the data from the backups on a daily basis. We just want to keep it like that for a longer run. So I do want to store the data in the okay high cost hard disk or basically capacity. So like we can choose it. Do you want to store the files in a low cost hard disk in the background, or in a medium, like a cold or like a hot? And based on that, the performance could also get vary. And redundancy, which we call it as a replication. So do you want to store this storage account data only in the specific Azure region? Or also you want to replicate this into other zones within the Azure region? Or do you want to replicate this data across the regions, like from central India to South India, you want to have a one more copy of it? So it all depends on the redundancy of the systems and transactions, which we would see called as a read-write operations. Read-write operations. In a given month, so you have a limit, a quota that, okay, for a storage account, you can have a number of read-write operations on a storage account. Okay, if you exceed that transaction limit, then again, it Azure is going to charge you on that. And the data we called as egress. So what is this data egress? Is anything which you're uploading a data into an Azure is free, but when you download a data out of Azure, is charged. So you are putting the files into an Azure storage. If the users are downloading it into their local PCs or anything and playing videos or anything which is on the data storage, which is outside, it means that the data has to come out from a storage account into your local PC. That is what we call as a data egress. Okay. So for in a given month, okay, there is a quota. So if you cross that quota, Azure is going to charge you for every, I would say, called as an MB of data which you download from Azure storage account to your local or bin used it. So these are the various parameters. It looks the cost of the storage account. So we have to keep in mind, hey, do I really need a hard tire? Do I really need an account type called as a premium for this one? Do I really need to have a geo replication? Because sometimes we feel and cloud is an expensive. Okay, because if we don't properly configure it, yes, it is going to be an expensive because I'm dumping your files into Azure storage with a premium account with an I would say called as an cross-region replication, then it will cost you a lot because you're not using it, but you're paying more for it. So be careful when we are creating a storage account. We have to be this. Then every storage account as called as in replications. So the storage account can be replicated. We call it as a redundancy, and sometimes we can call it as a replications, mostly technical terminologies. First option is called as an LRS, which is what we called as a local replication. Local replication. Now, within the Azure, you have a region. Within the region, you have zones. A zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. So this is your region in Azure. That is what I would call it as a central India. So I would say now in most of the regions, now Azure came up with zones, but in some regions still we don't have. So now I'll call zone 1, zone 2, then I'll call zone 3, zone 3. Now when we create a storage account, so we choose which region, and by default automatically it chooses a zone, in which zone it has to create it. Now, if my storage account got created in this zone 1 and with an option called as an LRS. So within this zone 1, the storage account data is stored. It has 3 different copies in the zone 1. So we call this an redundancy purpose. In case of a backend storage, it means that 3 different storage devices within that zone. Storage can provide you high availability in case of that disk got failure or kind of and that storage got failure. This data is available on 3 different zones. So it means that the storage account is being replicated within the zone or data in 3 different storage devices. We can call it as. Now here what happens is, for some reasons, if this entire zone goes down, then this storage account is not accessible until the Microsoft recovers it. And if you don't have a backup of this, then you are gone. That is where we would see called as an LRS, but it is a very cost effective for we can use this for anything which we don't need it. Now we have called as an ZRS. We called as a zone replication services. Zone replication service. What is this zone replication? Within the Central India as a region, we have 3 zones. So it is going to replicate this storage account across the 3 zones. So what is this zone? Zone is a complete physical isolation within that geographical region from a far failure, from and I would say called as a connectivity failure and anything. Now, 3 copies plus 3 copies are being maintained. So now what happens now? 1 copy is stored in zone 1 copy is stored in zone 2, another copy is stored in zone 3. So in LRS, 3 copies are stored in zone 1. So what happens in a case of an ZRS? 3 different copies are being stored in 3 different zones. 3 different zones within the same Central India region. So this will provide you high availability. For some reasons, if this zone goes down, you still have the data available in zone 2. So you can still access the data. And we have called as an GRS. It's called as a geo replication. So now, so we have this Central India. As the region. Now we can replicate this data to a region called as South India. South India. Now, so it has total of 6 copies. Total 6 copies. So now when you are creating a storage account at a later point of time, anytime we can change these settings. But this will have 6 copies, 3 copies in one region, which is primary region. In the secondary region, it is going to have 3 copies. So what is the advantage here? For some reasons, anything happens to the Central India, your data is still available in South India region. But the cost, as the data is getting copied from a Central India to South India, you are consuming the network bandwidth and everything. So Azure is going to charge you for the data transfer between these things. But what happens here is so this is a primary, this is a secondary. The secondary is not accessible all the time. It is accessible only when the primary location goes down. Primary location goes down. So until then, the data will keep replicating it. So we have called as an read access GRS. We called RAFA read access geo replication. So what is this read access geo replication is in? The data Central India is the primary storage account, which got replicated to the South India as a secondary geo replication or a geo region. Now both will be readable. Now the applications can read the data from this one, but they cannot write the data into the secondary region. The applications can write the data into the primary location, and Azure will replicate this data into the secondary location. Applications can still read the data from the South India parallelly. So while both are active, so in a GRS, the secondary one is not accessible. Only primary will be accessible. Only in case of anything happens to this primary one, it routes to the secondary region. But what happens in a case of an read access? So it'll create two different names, one for primary, one for secondary, and you'll have a different, okay, replicate 6 copies are being replicated. But what happens is that you also get access to the secondary one. Maybe applications which are secondary region, they can read the data from this one. Maybe they cannot write it, but like a report generation applications. Okay. So during the creation of a storage account, you need to choose which replication. Based on that, the cost of your storage account gets varied. It's going to get varied. Let's see how we can create a storage account, but we'll talk very detailed about each service, like as I said, a blob storage, file state, and these things, but this video. So go to the Azure portal, then search for storage accounts in your menu, and sorry, and create a storage account under resource group. Then I'm giving a storage account name. So if I'm giving a Venkat, say, it says the storage account name Venkat is already taken. It means someone else or me is already using this name. It doesn't allow you to do me that. So which region? So this is your primary region where it is going to create. So I'm selecting a South India. Service, what service you want to use it primarily on this storage account? Do you want to use a blob storage or a files or other purpose? I'm selecting a blob storage. Performance as we see here, standard or a premium. So based on these things, as we see, general purpose V2 account and premiums are available. So which gives that. Now you can choose whether you want to go for a standard or a premium. And replication. Do you want to local LRS or ZRS, which is available for standard? When you go to the premium, you would see called as an multiple options are available. As this South India is not having multiple regions, you are not getting it. Let me go to the Central India. Something you would see various options. We see called as an zones. ZRS is coming into picture because there are zones available in Central India, but in South India, we still not have active zones. Blobs. Okay. So this way you can choose it based on this thing. So if I'm going for a premium, okay, file storage. So you have provision 1, provision 2, and you get ZRS or GRS kind of things. Okay. So based on the need of that, you can choose the performance and what is your primary one. Then you can just create. Okay. I don't want to. As is discussed, our one storage account we can have all have blob storage, file shares, then table storage, and queue, and SFTP. Now we would see the storage account got created. When you go to storage accounts, refresh it, I would see Venkat ASA1. So this is the storage account. Like this, you can have a number of storage accounts and the properties of this one. And when we go to the storage, we see containers, file shares, queues, and tables. So under one storage account, you can use all the different types of the storage types which you want to use it, or you can create for a specific purpose. Right. So the next video we'll talk about containers, that how we can use the containers. Okay. Do subscribe to this particular channel. You'll keep getting more videos, and you'll have the entire AZ 104 and other courses for Azure. You'll get access whenever it's being uploaded.